Hello everyone, my name is KyLee Bales and today I'll be discussing Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Alright, let's start with some background on Mr. Frost. Robert Lee Frost was born in San Francisco, California in 1874. When Frost was 11 years old, his father died of tuberculosis and they moved to Massachusetts. Frost spent the remainder of his life inhabiting the New England area, and his works are said to depict the life situations of the common man in this area. That is being examined through Marxist criticism. Frost went on to win 4 Pulitzer Prizes and even had the honor of speaking at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. Now we're going to read the poem.
Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Literary critic Edward Rosenberry states, "The obvious reason for all the discussion of Stopping by Woods is that it is generally considered a major work of art, perhaps one of the master lyrics of the English language. As an important human document for all its aesthetic singularity, it tends to occupy a crowded eminence." Let's dissect this poem. We're now going to interpret this poem line by line, separating the 4 stanzas. We will be viewing the significance of the title, diction, imagery, tone, metaphors, repetition, theme, and rhyming scheme. The poem's composed of 16 lines, which are divided into 4 stanzas, and is written in iambic tetrameter. Iambic tetrameter is a line of poetry with 4 beats of 1 unstressed syllable followed by 1 stressed syllable. Let's take a look at the title. The title in itself is rather blunt compared to the metaphorical nature of the rest of the poem. However, the title taken in its literal meaning, looking at new criticism, suggests a peaceful setting. Beginning with stanza 1, we're going to dive into the poem and look at both the literal and figurative meanings. So, taking a look at line 1 from a literal perspective, the diction suggests that he seems to know the owner of the woods. Metaphorically, the speaker seems to be confused and uncertain and is trying to reassure himself. As we come across the second and third line, we see that he's aware that he is by himself in the woods and that no one's watching him. Also in line 3, the innocence of the poem kind of goes away as we see a real mystery brought about as to why he's here. The 4th line is also mysterious because it's unusual for a traveler to be stopping or wondering if he doesn't want to reach his destination or he really is just captivated by the beauty of nature. However, the last word in that line is snow, and snow can be representative of purity and cleanliness, and the white of snow also represents purity and cleanliness, so perhaps he's trying to clear and cleanse his mind. As we go into the second stanza, we're taking a look at the first line, and he mentions his little horse. The fact that he calls his horse little may suggest he thinks of his horse as insignificant, which may make sense following the lines to come. We are also seeing some anthropomorphism as we look at this first line, and the fact that he says that his horse must think it queer, and queer meaning strange in this line. Then following with line 2 in the second stanza, we see that he's projecting his thoughts onto the horse. As we reach the third line, it mentions the woods and the frozen lake, which may suggest a metaphorical meaning of life and death. death being the woods, and the lake, water, being life. And as we look at the last line, we really start to see the dark and cold tone of this poem, stating that it's the darkest evening of the year, literally may meaning a winter solstice, but metaphorically and figuratively meaning we start to see some maybe different meanings of this poem. We may start to see some contemplation between life and death. This may be suggestive of a suicide, as that is the darkest evening one might face. In the third stanza, in the first and second lines, we see some anthropomorphism again, and this is the speaker's thoughts projected onto the horse. Is he really doing the right thing by taking his own life, if that may be the meaning of this? The third and fourth line of the stanza provides some imagery with the wind and the snowfall, and it's stating that it's very quiet in this forest and they're all alone too. And then the fourth stanza is arguably the most powerful stanza of this poem. The first line describes the woods as lovely, dark, and deep, which may be indicative of his psychological state, that he may be mentally ill. He wants to stay here in this darkness, and he doesn't care about his journey. He wants to be there forever, which may indicate that the speaker is wanting to die and get rid of all the obligations that he has, and he wants to free himself from the misery of his life. But that changes in the second line of the stanza. The second line of the stanza changes it all, because he says he has promises to keep. The promises may be unspoken obligations that he has with the people that are in his life. As we take a look at the last two lines of the poem, these are arguably the most powerful parts of this poem. So literally looking at him, miles to go before sleep, meaning he has to keep tracking on his journey. Figuratively though, this holds quite some power, meaning that he still has a whole life to live before he dies. This is known as a refrain in poetry. The poet here is explaining a complex and difficult situation, and he is finishing the poem with these two lines. The speaker here is fighting against his mental state of darkness, and he's moving forward with his obligations and his life journey. The literary critic George Monteiro, in his publishing of the Robert Frost Review, describes the two lines like this: that prodigious and poignant end, two closing lines identical in every syllable, but one personal and physical, and the other metaphysical and universal. I dare not quote from memory lest I displace one small precious word. We are now going to look at a clip of interpretive dancing done by myself and 3 other individuals that just kind of brings this poem to life and creates some imagery of the dark and misty tone of this poem.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
As a part of ambiguity, the dancers all felt different ways and produced different emotions while listening to the poem, just as when reading poetry, one may interpret a completely different meaning than another individual.